Perhaps the science of today in regards to how big things could grow does not apply to the pre-flood world, which we know was a much different world.
Okay, let me comment first because Diane's already just finished the section. She can come in afterwards, or anybody else. When you say that the conditions or things like that are now different, so the science would have been different, you need to carefully consider what governs the rules of science, right? So that when you look at the biblical picture, God has stamped his nature on the whole of creation. And he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So therefore, the law of gravity doesn't go around changing its mind and all of a sudden you're sliding up a hill. It's got a fixed concept because God is fixed, right? So that when you look at the little phrase, God stamped his nature upon even the living creatures, we reproduce after our kind because God doesn't change. So the same God who ruled for marriage in Genesis chapter 1 and 2 with Adam and Eve is the same God as today. So therefore, when the homosexuals say, but things have changed, no, they haven't. God has remained the same. He's just as much opposed to homosexuality now as he was at the Tower of Babel, at Sodom, any of those places, right? He has remained unchanged. So there is no evidence that the physical laws or the chemical laws have changed, particularly because there's that little phrase, we reproduce after our kind. So once God had created us back in Adam and in Eve, you get to know why Jesus said he even knows the number of hairs on our head. It was built into the algorithm that was put into Adam. And he's got the best computers on the planet, can calculate it straight away as to what that can actually do in a fallen world. So when you look at the history, the only trend you see is from good to bad to worse. But the actual basic science doesn't change, right? So what you were looking at today with gravity, what you're looking at is how biology behaves. You can sit down and predict, well, what could I fix to make it do better like it used to? But it's the science which, in essence, remains the paradigm that stays the same. Diane?
Yes. The human beings are designed to reproduce after their kind. So the basic biology would be the same. It's just gone downhill a bit, or quite a lot actually. But that basic life cycle of the growth pattern, growing through childhood, going through a growth spurt at adolescence, then stopping in young adult life, that would have been the same. Now, it may have been stretched out a bit. After all, with those long lifespans, we don't know sort of how old people were when they came to reproductive maturity, but certainly by the time you get to reproductive maturity, you have stopped growing in height. And because the environment was very good, the average height probably was higher, probably somewhere between 6 and 7 feet. But get meters or 16 feet, not even if the environment is very good, depending in terms of the uniform mild climate, the nutrition being relatively free of disease and fewer mutations. Degeneration would have started back there, but there would have been fewer mutations. But the limits to growth are not related to that sort of degeneration. They are actually related to the laws of physics and chemistry and basic physiology in terms of how to maintain that size with the blood circulation and muscles and things like that. So yes, even though the environment was a lot better, it wasn't that much better. The 16 feet giants are still in the fairy tale sort of range, like Jack and the Beanstalk and the big BFG and things like that. Just not physiologically possible, even in the best of environments.
There is a question there, Joe, on there's so many questions to ask. Would you consider doing a part two? The answer is yes, we might, but wait until we finish the crunch point at the end of it, because we've sort of skimmed the surface, and we've got interesting questions like Shogi War there saying Nephilim does not mean tyrant. In reality, have to correct you, bro. You live down the road, so I know where you live if I have to come and get you. Your tyrant is why our first English translation actually used the word tyrantes, right? It actually does have that meaning. Look it up in your concordances and you find it is an ancillary meaning of Nephilim. That's why it says they were renowned, meaning they were famous in a negative sense. And that's why their first English translation from the Hebrew uses the word tyrant, and then King James swaps back to the word giants because it's influenced by the Latin, etc. Even there's a break with the Catholic Church, but there's still that influence.
And the Latin Greek is influenced by the pagan philosophy, so you've got to be so careful with the historicity of some of these words. Perhaps we should just quickly deal with a couple of the comments that Sandy C has made about line of Seth, daughters of men, line, and so on and so forth. Just to comment on a couple of these, because I think that'll lead quite nicely into our sort of why does this all kind of matter. And just by the way, we kind of ran through a sort of like a rough discussion script before we started, and we've still got like about 5 or 6 points that we haven't even got to. So yes, I think a part 2 is probably worth considering at the very least, but also just to remind you that this is based off of, what is it now, John, 20 years worth of study that was being pulled together, and I've been involved in it for the last sort of 6 or 7 years, and we're getting all this stuff pulled together into what we are going to try and be one of the most detailed and comprehensive books on this topic, looking at not only, because it goes into such wider things, because all of a sudden when you start talking about this, you're into the difficulties of translations versus transliterations versus how the Hebrew would understand it versus putting it into the English, and the complexity just explodes. So it is important to get the full and big perspective on this, as well as the real why does this matter, which is what we're going to be dealing with just shortly. So Sam,